Before we get started, again, I'd like to welcome you all to Mike Marks' exhibition talk for his 2020 McKnight Printmaking Fellowship. And I want to make sure and offer High Point's gratitude to the McKnight Foundation for their funding and support of this program, as well as the panelists for our 2020 fellowship, Delita Martin and Michelle Grabner. So the way this is going to go is, I'm going to introduce Mike. He's going to talk a little bit about his fellowship year, some of his specific works, as well as his process in general. And we're going to move around the gallery a little bit. We're trying to save some time at the end for a little Q&A. And I will ask that you submit your questions via the chat. And when we get to that point, I'll simply select some and read them, and Mike will answer. And I also want to make sure and invite you all to check out this exhibition in person. It's up through Saturday, February 5th, and we have gallery hours from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, as well as Saturdays from noon until 4. If you're unable to make it in person, we'll have plenty of high-quality content on High Point's website, and Mike's website will contain these images as well. So, with that being said, I'm going to introduce Mike, and please note, I have told Mike he can remove his mask. It's just he and I in the space, and that way I think it's going to be a lot easier for everyone to hear him talking. So here's Mike.
Thanks, Josh.
You're welcome.
And thanks everybody for tuning in. I should probably just start with big thanks all around, because this has just been an amazing thing that have happened for this past year, especially considering this past year. The big thanks to Josh for helping out with everything, and High Point and McKnight, the panelists. It's been amazing. So I'm Mike Marks. I'm a printmaker here in Minneapolis, and my work is pretty focused on critical habitat and changing landscapes. It's something I've been working with for a number of years, and it's been evolving over those years, and there's a little bit of that transition happening even in the show tonight. 2020, the fellowship was for 2020, and 2020 was a year that had a lot of reasons to feel not motivated and a lot of reasons to not make artwork. But a lot of those reasons to not do something were also the same reason to really make the work and to keep going with it. And this is kind of the result of that. I guess I'll just go right into it. We're right now in the back gallery of High Point. And I have there's a bunch of intaglio prints in here. Intaglio prints are made using copper as a material, and you etch your image into the copper and then ink the plate, and you can pull the print from that. This is really where I was coming from prior to the fellowship. For a number of years, I've been doing intaglio prints. It was kind of my background in school. So these were really kind of what flowed into the fellowship. They're depictions of remnant prairie land here in Minnesota, and they're made. Pretty much all the work that I've been making over the past several years uses some sort of subtractive mark, and these are no different. They begin with a drawing that is put on the plate, and then I etch over it, but the drawing actually blocks it. So when I remove it, the drawing inverts and becomes negative space. So I'm actually etching all the spaces in between things like grasses and native plants. This is where I expected most of my work to go this past year. And all the unexpected things that happened really actually made me pivot a little bit with that.
These, if you don't mind me interjecting, Mike, these prints seem to reference pretty specific places, and that's more evident when you see them in person. Do the locations, are they fictional, or are they real locations that you have some connection to?
Yeah, they're real. all my work is based on places I've personally gone out to and have personal connections with. So that's sort of part of my research in making the prints. As I go out in the field, I spend time there, I draw, I take photographs, and then I would come back to the studio. That's generally how I've worked in the past and how I've worked in these. So these are, Minnesota is a unique place in that we have the end of the eastern hardwood forests and then the beginning of the prairie and then the southern reach of the northwood. So we've got all these different places that meet. And having only been in Minnesota since 2016, the prairie was the place I knew the least about. So these sort of resulted from kind of leaning into what I didn't know and going out and exploring these places. For example, this one is based on Hole in the Mountain Prairie in western Minnesota, whereas this one's a little closer to home. This is just south of the cities, down in the Vermilion Highlands. So they're really sort of these remnant sections of a habitat that used to cover large areas of the state.
And for those of you who don't know Mike, he's I would say a pretty avid outdoorsman. So it's no surprise to hear you. Something I hadn't put together previously was that when you got here, it's probably the prairie's quite a different environment from the other places you've lived.
Yeah.
So that would be a point of fascination.
Yeah, that was the one that I really just didn't have any experience with at all. Northern forests. I've spent a lot of time around those because I moved here from Maine, and I have a lot of Wisconsin connections, family connections. But the prairies were just something totally new, and I kind of overlooked them really for many years and wanted to just give them a chance, and went out there, and there's actually a real density. Like, they look just like an empty space, and then you go out in them and the grass is over your head and you sometimes don't have a horizon. That's kind of why the horizons sort of just slowly vanish in these. When you're out there, it feels like it could go forever and get a little disoriented in it. That's kind of where these were originally coming from. And because there's only about 1% of what they originally were, there's only about 1% of the original coverage of them. So what's left is really special. And there's a lot of, some of these areas are really focused on bringing that type of habitat back, because a healthy land makes healthy water. It all comes back around to healthy communities and things like that. So I really loved finding these places.
And something I also wanted to hit on, the rest of you watching this will know this shortly when we get to some of Mike's later work made during the fellowship that includes a lot of color. All of the intaglio prints included in the exhibition are printed in black and white. And I was hoping you could comment a little bit on your decision to not introduce color to the intaglio prints.
Yeah, for these ones, I intentionally didn't do them in color because there's sort of just a mood when you're out there. I think the black and white talks more to the solitude you feel when you're in these places. They're not really highly visited places. It's not like going to the mountains or rivers where there could be a lot of other people. Usually you get out to these spots and they're kind of forgotten. So I think doing it in black and white was a little more caught sort of the ethereal quality that happens out there and that solitude that's there.
Great. Would you like to comment anything else on the intaglio prints? I know you're excited to show the relief work.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll finish by saying, this is where I thought I was going to keep putting my energy, and I love making these. I'm not stopping making them, but I came into this fellowship really thinking, this is where I'm going to go. And then once the pandemic really started setting in and things began shutting down, and even the studio shut down for a little bit during that big shutdown period, I was working out of my home studio. So I just took intaglio off the table, and I thought, I've been was already starting to bring woodcut back into some of my work. And I thought, this is the time to do it now, because I can do it at my home. And the way that everything just sort of came to a stop with the pandemic felt like I had finally had time to try some ideas that I've been wanting to do with woodcut, and just felt like I never had the chance to put the time aside to experiment and mess things up with getting it to where I wanted. So it really, in a weird way, the pandemic allowed me to kind of make that pivot to this other work that I've been wanting to do. It did start with the prairie work, which is kind of what was happening right here. And this was the first woodcut I made in 2020, and it was a reductive woodcut. So it was one surface that you carve, you ink, you print, you carve more, you ink, you print. So you keep carving away one block surface till there's nothing left. And that was really speaking to me about like the important, taking this material away really felt important to talking about the loss of place, the loss of habitat. So I was sort of starting to do some things with that in this print that kind of became the stepping stone to the main body of woodcuts that I began during the fellowship. And maybe we'll head over.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody requested to see the work a little bit. Of course, we're going to lose quite a bit of the actual effect these works have. Projecting, oops, wrong way. All right, so tell us a little bit about this new direction, these woodcuts. When I, just a little anecdote here, when I met Mike, when he joined the co-op, it was pretty much all collagraphs all the time. And then during your Jerome residency a number of years ago, you kind of really hit the ground running with intaglio.
Yeah.
And then again, like you said, during the pandemic, now it's all these woodcuts seem to be the most recent direction. Yeah,
and I'm really excited about these. I mean, this was some work that I've been really wanting to make for a while, and just needed to kind of have that time. And that's kind of what this McKnight Fellowship gave me, was I just felt like I needed to have that time to dig into, I was gonna say carve a new path forward, but pun intended, I guess. Yeah, I mean, when I moved to Minnesota, I was doing a lot of collograph work coming from Maine, and collograph really sits in between the type of printing that you do with an intaglio print and relief. It kind of has a little bit of both. I've always really loved woodcut. I've always loved that directness of it and sort of the warmth it has from the wood. So I've been thinking about it for a few years. And the woodcut that we kind of transitioned from in there, it has sort of the beginnings of what's happening in these, with these sort of white, they look like white lines that are overlaying the print. They're actually the absence of print. So like that's just carved away and left as open paper. That was sort of the big segue into these. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think with the pandemic, a lot of my research is spent to make prints involves going out into the field and into places. And with these, I began actually just kind of looking back through things that I've already done and places I've been. So there was this recall of memory, and wanting to sort of, yeah, try and recall these places and make it apparent that there is something with memory maybe happening in them. So instead of reduction print, these are all printed with four blocks that are carved. And then I was printing them with a CMYK process. We don't have to get too technical with that, but that's basically there's a blue layer, a yellow layer, a magenta layer, and a black layer. It's kind of traditionally been a commercial printing type of process. It's usually thought of something that's really fast. At least I think of it as, you can quickly make a full color image with it. But to hand carve it was to kind of slow it down into the slowest way possible. Because these are made up of lots and lots of little lines that overlap each other. I can actually pull up these blocks here a little bit. So here's some of the blocks here that make up this print, for example. So take a little, these are carved. I actually, for this one, carved both sides, which I decided was not a good idea moving forward. But at the time, I thought that's a great way to save some material. Yeah, so these are all carved. So whatever is left is what prints the color in these. These prints all really begin with photographs that I've taken, which is even that's kind of, I usually in more of a drawing is usually more of my starting place of things. But these actually begin with photos that I then would bring up on my computer and rephotograph in order to create a distortion that happens. The two lenses and monitors don't like each other, and they tend to warp and sort of reveal this sort of digital distortion of the image. That was sort of the starting place with these, and then drawing back over them, color separating them, and so separating the images into their colors to be carved. And it was really about slowing down. I mean, that was a big part of it, was to slow down and really stretch out the image making process. It's been sort of a goal of mine to do that for a while. And
your whole, specifically with this process of what I would call double digitizing an image, you're taking a digital image, a digitally projected image on your monitor and photographing it again. And can I just say personally, I think you've done an incredible job of capturing that noisy waviness that you get from that distortion.
yeah,
But I think it's really laden with a whole lot of backstory there. The reasons for, you're talking about recall. So by taking a digital image and then rephotographing the digital image and the distortion, I think there's a lot to mine there, a lot of meaning.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how you came up with that process and what it means to you as far as recall and the memory of these places.
I've always been interested in sort of like things kind of like having like a feedback loop on themselves. I've played music, and there is, you find that in a lot of music, of like things kind of echoing and delaying over each other. It's something I've always been drawn to. Even the artist Alvin Lucier did a piece called "I'm Sitting in a Room," where he just keeps recording the same thing over and it breaks down as it goes. So I've always liked the idea of things just kind of being put through the same process over and over, but changing. And in terms of just the photographing part of it, it was kind of coming from like trying to like come up with new ways of seeing things. I was using it originally for a different project where I was trying to focus on take photos of the furthest thing in the distance of a picture and bring it back into its own piece. And I just started noticing like, oh, there's like this distortion happens. And as soon as I started noticing that it would create this wave, it's almost like when you're like an old TV, if you put a magnet on it, how it would bend the image, has sort of a similar analog effect to that. But the more I was looking at that, the more it felt like it was talking about, I think, the way we sort of consume images of nature too, like even things with, so much of it is through our, Instagram and social media, where landscape becomes sort of a backdrop. So there is this digital information to presenting landscape that's really common now. And I kind of wanted to take that back. That's such a quick thing to have happened, to take that picture. And I really wanted to take that back to maybe what it was actually about, and, and stretch it out into bringing it back to the hand. Because I remember hearing somewhere that that photography stops the moment and drawing works through the moment. And so I've always thought, well, that must mean printmaking just extends it, just stretches it out. And that's kind of what I was trying to do here, where it's kind of in between that digital information and the hand.
Let's go show this one too. And I also wanted to make mention of, there's really this simple yet quite beautiful relationship between, you're talking about slowing down, you're taking the most instantly and immediately consumable method of seeing something, which is a digital image.
Yeah.
And you're painstakingly, painstaking is an understatement. Look, uber painstakingly recreating these by carving them into wood in these minuscule lines. And I just think there's a beautiful additional meaning behind that connection of what you're actually representing and how you're actually doing it.
Yeah. How I do it is really important to me. Like how an image is made is something that I've really become aware of in recent years. Like the way it's made speaks to what it's talking about. And so I think these are definitely trying to do that. Yeah, painstaking. So this one, Remainder, was, this one took me a long time. So it's 4 blocks. Yeah, you saw it in progress months and months ago. I recorded close to 250 hours of carving time for this one. So that's among 4 blocks. I got really good at sharpening tools. Picked up a lot of new tricks along the way. But yeah, really being able to spend time with the surface and the image, and at the same time, think about taking away this material and leaving just this little bit of information on there. That was really important, especially with this mix of digital information and the representation of places that are changing, removing that material physically so that you can't go back to it. You're carving it away was a really important part of making this work. So Remainder depicts Exit Glacier in Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska. It's a place I love. It's a place I haven't been in a really long time, that I was pre-pandemic hoping to get back to for some research plans, and things changed. And instead I made this print that was based on it the last time I was there. So the glacier as it's depicted here actually doesn't exist there. It's moved almost a mile back from where it is. So it's sort of, that's that memory thing I was sort of, or the recall of, it's sort of sitting in between now and then, I guess, with it's depicting it as it was, it's made now, but if you went there, you wouldn't be able to have the same experience with it.
You had been talking about the physicality of carving, and there's also a lot of physicality to the way you've you've made those intaglio prints we were looking at before. I'm wondering if it's a conscious decision, the physicality of your process, does that echo the duress that our natural landscapes are under?
I think so. I think with that's something that I think a lot about. It at least guides me in making the work. I don't know if it necessarily comes in at the end, but it is an idea that kind of keeps me moving in making the work. To think about the way that surface, you change it and it holds and records like your marks, sort of the same way that landscapes kind of hold histories and marks. So I think about that as I'm making these. Even the white lines that are kind of the thing that sort of sits on top of the images, that really kind of grew actually out of prints, intaglio prints I was doing years ago. And originally that line was a black line, and it was really about sort of human intrusion and marks that were, altering the landscape. And then as I started doing woodcut, it became a white line. And then by the time I got to this point, it's become not so much, maybe not directly a mark of human intrusion, but a mark of interference that like keeps the representation of a place from being totally complete. So there's little pieces missing.
I'm glad you touched on that, because one of the things I was thinking about when preparing for this talk was the landscapes that you're depicting don't really show any evidence of human intrusion.
Yeah.
The receding glacier is obviously due to human-caused reasons, but we're not seeing a power line running through this or anything like that. So I'm glad you touched on the absence of mark or the voids that you've left.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of wondering if that was a nod.
That's kind of where it's moved into with that mark, is because it's not apparent here, but in some of the collograph work that you probably saw years ago, I mean, there was a little more nod to roads and mining, and there were references to it, and now those things are gone, and it's become more of just an absence that sits on top.
And in many cases, I would say the gestures of removal, while beautiful and sweeping, they might be conceived as violent.
I think they could, yeah. And that's something that's evolving, because this is work that's gotten to this point this past year, and that's definitely a consideration in it, yeah.
I wonder if
do you want to move over?
Yeah, we're doing pretty well on time, and I know this is a pretty recent print with a really interesting backstory of the place you're depicting.
Yeah.
So I think people would probably enjoy hearing you speak about this one too. I'll give them a good view of it first. It's hard to do on Zoom, I apologize, but this is a very large woodcut that Mike has made.
Yeah, so you might not know by looking at it, this actually came after these woodcuts we were just at. These are the works I'm really excited about. It's sort of become the primary body of work moving forward, but they also take a very long time. They sort of demand that slow approach. So, in the meanwhile, while making those, it's sort of I sort of equated it to, and I am, when I'm making those, I'm literally just hunched over and carving away. Everyone, when you're doing that all day, you kind of want to take that bend in the opposite direction, kind of stretch it out. That's really when there's two prints in here that sort of are acting that way. That we're to kind of just take a break from that really analytical carving that was happening and step back and just let the woodcut be a woodcut and a single inking and a single surface, while still thinking about, you know, making marks and what marks and places mean. So what I'm getting at is this is depicting a place here in Minnesota that my wife and I discovered a few years ago, and it's called Big Bog, and it's the largest boreal peatland in the lower 48. And it's probably like 5 hours from the Twin Cities. And it's this incredibly sprawling bog complex. We were really excited to go up to it because it has all these unique plants that live there, and we got up there and a foot of snow dropped on us the day we got there, so we didn't get to see any of the plants. But it became this beautiful time where the tamarack and spruce trees that are all up there were just sticking up out of the bog as it was getting covered in snow. And you could see that as the snow fell in, you could see the marks of where like old drainage farming ditches had been tried to put in at one point. This area was also the last home for woodland caribou in the lower 48. And you can still see their migration paths in the bog, and they haven't been there since 1940. That's how long the bog, it's just whatever happens in the bog like stays in the bog, I guess. But you know, it's this neat place where marks just sit on it. And you know, there aren't caribou trails depicted in this print, but I did kind of want to pay homage to this place that holds all these marks in this really neat way. And I think it's just a special place to me. So this was depicting that when that first snow was starting to fall.
And in reference to your earlier woodcuts, which obviously, as you described, are based on photographs which are manipulated by the lens. This print, as well as your intaglio prints, while obviously referencing specific places, I'd love to know how you come back into the studio with them. Are these based on memory? Are you doing sketches while you're there, photographs, some combination?
Yeah, I mean, I usually have my sketchbook with me, so I do a lot of sketching.
Can we see a peek in it?
Yeah, you want to take a look?
It's I know from experience that it's really pretty incredible to see inside there, but our viewers might enjoy that as well.
Where I'm at in the screen there, but
you're good. That's perfect
okay.
Distance.
Actually, I think I have not the original sketch for this print, but I do have. There's a bluegill.
You'd rather be fishing when you're
there's one of the sketches leading up to the print here.
Looks like ballpoint pen.
Yeah, and marker, just sort of two-toned.
Yeah, so I appreciate you showing that to us. I again have the foreknowledge that you do a lot of drawing.
Yeah. Drawing is sort of my. I mean, it's just kind of my. I always call it my home in terms of making. Like it's something I can always go back to, and it's really what kind of lets me understand places. I feel like. I mean, I kind of think by drawing at a place, you sort of get to understand it more. So usually when I go out to places, it's a mix of drawing and photography. There's some invention too, like this, especially in making a woodcut, you let the process take over with carving, and it's sort of that mix of those things. In the terms of this one, I just did a drawing straight on to the wood, and then just started going right at it.
Based on that sketch.
Yeah. I mean, there was other things that were happening, you know, certain areas, because I was working with one surface, I did want to get some variation. So the lower half here is all sanded. The upper half is, I burned with a blowtorch and then wire brushed it to get a grainier look for the sky. So there's a little bit, it's the same ink going across, it's just holding differently. You get that little grayer shift up there.
Yet another reason to see it in person.
Yeah.
So you can really.
Right. Yeah, it was really, especially in the sky here, it was really, I mean, that's about as opposite of carving as you can get from the four colored block ones over here. This is really just kind of ripping at the wood to get it to open up.
Do you allow, so Mike's carving plywood, and do you allow, I know from experience that depending on how you carve it, like the plies themselves will tear unexpectedly. And in the sky, it looks as if you've kind of allowed for that, possibly even encouraged some of the grain of the wood to shred as it wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some areas up in here where I wasn't even using a carving tool. I was taking like a dry point needle. You'd use an etching and just dragging it through and letting it split open so the wood would open where it kind of wanted to.
I bet that was fun after the carving.
It was just a nice, it's like taking it was like just shaking it out kind of thing. They were printed on the same type of wood, which I usually use a Baltic birch. But I mean, in those, there's so much line work in those ones that when something would, you know, something comes off, I just kind of roll with it. I don't worry too much about, you know, repairing, like oh, I accidentally carved away an area I wasn't supposed to. We never even really notice.
Have you ever heard a reduction woodcut called a suicide cut?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what I like about woodcut is how direct it is, and they're really, I mean, I guess you could make a filler and put it back in, but you really are kind of, by embracing woodcut, you're kind of on this path of, I'm taking it away and that's it. What I have is what I work with. I really enjoyed it there. There's something just about that I think I look for, even with how I interact with places and a lot of the things in my life, that paring it down a little bit like that.
Yeah, it seems, in my opinion, it seems that woodcut, of all the processes I've done, is the technique in which the material has the most voice. It forces its way into the end result.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even when if the grain comes in, then it's even like, it's wood. Like it's what it is. I think even these, when you're far away from them, they do sort of, they become photographic, but as you come up to them, you see that those layers separate and they just become that line work. And I think you can see that they're still woodcuts when you're with them in person. I think they have a warmth. I mean, if you were to handle one in person too, I mean, they have that physical impression too. Even though they're on very thin paper.
I'm glad you mentioned the paper. I was curious about what kind of paper you're printing on.
These were printed on Kozo paper.
So that's like thinner than a like an intaglio paper, probably?
Yeah, much thinner. Yeah, it's probably the thinnest paper I've ever worked with. But it's actually really strong. So it's not a mulberry, but it's, Kozo is a similar type of paper. So it has a long grain. So even when it's really thin, if you were to pull on it, it just doesn't really tear. It just kind of holds. It's surprisingly strong, really absorbent. So when I printed the multi-block wood cuts. I'm printing it all wet. The ink is all wet when I'm printing it. I'm not printing one color and then setting it aside and coming back to it. I'm just kind of going all the way through for each print. And that's partially because of the overlap that with the different layers as they're being carved, they overlap, and the inks make those 4 colors actually make a lot of colors when they overlap and mix. And I really just sort of enjoy when they're wet, having that mix happen right away. And it's such an absorbent paper that it just really worked well for me doing that.
Had you, so some of our audience might not know that for most processes, you would allow one layer to dry before printing a subsequent layer.
Yeah.
Was it through trial and error that you learned to print wet on wet, or was it something you knew you were going to do before you even started?
It was trial and error. And it was kind of just, yeah, it was mostly trial and error. I didn't really know if I was going to do it from the onset. I had done it, and actually I'd never really worked with CMYK before these. I'd done it once as an experiment with pronto plate lithography, but it was a very brief and sort of muddy looking thing. But that's when I realized, like, oh, like the wet on wet seemed to work really well for me because of how thin that paper was. I think if it was a thick paper, it would actually get harder to control it. But because it just absorbs immediately into the thin fibers, I was able to just work really right with it. Did have to be careful. I was printing a lot of these by hand without a press too. So, meaning.
What's that like?
What is it like?
The technique, because
yeah,
some people may not know how you would take an impression.
You need the press because we have these big press. It's a big bed, press bed, steel drum. I think it's steel, right? Yeah, and you crank the pressure down, and as you turn the wheel, it brings your plate and paper through, and you get this immense pressure that pushes the paper into the plate. You can print a lot of things that way. You can print etchings, woodcut, mono prints. But woodcut also has a whole long history of just being printed by hand. And I sort of used the initial shutdown to kind of really have fun with that and try it out, because it's completely different ways of registering your paper to your block. And then once you lay it down, usually put a protective sheet on the back, usually a piece of cooking, baking paper or something. And then you just have a disc that's a barren, and that's what you use to press it. So you're sitting there pressing the paper down into the inked wood. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the physicality of it. I actually found I was more accurate with those registration systems. Not maybe the registration, maybe it wasn't the registration, but I've had, especially when I get into larger wood cuts, I've had issues on presses in the past where it pulls the paper. And so if you're doing multiple layers, things get off. But with the hand printing, everything is laying down and that pressure is straight down on it. So I just found I got a really knew what I was kind of setting myself up for, just in terms of printing it. Plus with the thin paper, you'd see it come through. So I could see, oh, that's not lined up. Or like, oh, good, it's lined up. You could see it right away because it would come right through the paper.
Great. Well, I think we could probably
open it up a little.
Yeah, if it seems good to you.
Sure.
If there's anything else you wanted to cover, or we could let the audience have some questions.
Yeah.
Somebody just commented in the chat that they wanted to see the prints you were talking about printing at home with the Baron.
Yep.
And
It's all of these ones that have the 4-layer.
you get really close, you might be able to see how it breaks into individual lines of color that are overlapping and coming together to create the larger image. So to that person asking, it was this room where those prints Mike was describing are displayed.
Yeah, everything on these 3 walls. Well, actually, everything in this room, in the front room here, was all printed by hand.
Somebody, all right, so sorry, I apologize if I interrupted you.
No.
Questions are coming in now, so
Sure. Let them rip.
if it's okay, I just have to get to the chat. For the CMYK prints, so the prints in this room, did you use a ruler?
A ruler?
I think they're probably asking because the lines are so straight.
Nope, it's all free. It's all free carved. So, just keeping really sharp tools, and I mean, it's a hard wood. I mean, Baltic birch is pretty hard, so it holds your line pretty crisply too. Not always. I mean, there's different grades of wood, but like a high grade Baltic birch does that. So, no, there was no rulers involved.
Someone else asked, did you really use a blowtorch on the bog print?
Yeah. Yep. Did it on our back patio table, which is a metal table. So just did it outside with took the blowtorch. You know, wire brushing wood will bring that grain out a little bit. The blowtorching takes away some of it too. You can sort of selectively choose it a little bit too. If you draw with the fire, you'll get more grain coming out in that spot.
Yeah, because the blowtorch, it weakens the fibers between the grain, right?
Yeah, so the softer wood that's between what you see as the grain is what's getting taken away. So you're left with that hardened, the hard grain. That's where that prints.
Okay. Do you have a clear sense of what you will do when you begin, or if not, how does your vision change as you work on each piece?
With these ones actually have a lot of planning involved, like more than the way I've approached prints in the past. I think at the same time, there's a lot of planning of the image and of things lining up, but I really don't have. There's still that magical moment of like not really knowing if it's gonna pan out until you start going, and working with the 4 color separation. I mean, making really small changes, not just in the colors themselves, but even in the order that they're printed. Like really small changes make really big results. So there's a lot of figuring out in the printing process with these.
That's interesting to hear, because I don't know if the person asking this or any of the other people watching this talk get the impression that it certainly doesn't seem as if your approach is malleable because of the end result being so pristine and incredibly well presented. So that's interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the line work is pretty set in there. I guess in terms of malleability with you know, assembling the lines to make the image. I think if anything, I hold back, and I can always take more away as I'm printing to be like, oh, that area shouldn't even be there. And I can carve it out as I go. Yeah, so that's the big. Yeah, there's a lot of front end. They're kind of front heavy with process and planning and things changing. And then once you get carving, you're kind of committing to the idea of it. Yeah.
But it sounds also like you're not inflexible.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Someone asked, and I think you mostly alluded to an answer to this question. Do you prepare the color separations digitally before carving by hand, or is the color in these prints intuitive?
I do make digital like mock-ups kind of them to kind of get an idea or to play around with the color to get different results of if one thing is more transparent or, you know, a warmer blue versus a cooler one. Is that what they were asking? I kind of forgot.
They were asking. I think they were asking if you're taking the digital, at least the way I read it, if you're taking the digital image and like breaking it into the CMYK layers digitally before you introduce the individual separations to the block and start carving, or if it's more done just intuitively by.
It starts as a digital separation, and then once I start carving is when it sort of takes on its more you know, that movement that it has with the line. Its origins are as a digital separation, and then it's kind of make a guide from that I transfer to the wood. I have to cut and I sort of tape a lot of things, get things transferred on, and that acts as a guide for me to carve from.
We have two more questions, both about works that we're not currently looking at.
Yeah.
So someone asked about these objects,
Yeah.
which hadn't been shown yet.
Yeah. I'll let you get a
Sorry,
image of.
I can't avoid casting a shadow, everyone. It's going to happen. Maybe I can minimize it a little bit. So these objects, somebody wanted you to comment a little bit more on them. Talk about the sculptural pieces with the clamps. They said.
These were an idea that I haven't worked too much three-dimensionally. I've done some installation stuff years and years and years ago. But these actually started kind of growing out of, well, two things, I guess. I was looking at a lot of line while carving these. I was thinking about this line. There's a video piece in the show as well that has sort of this these sort of fragmented lines and moving images on them. And so I started just thinking about these edges, and it's sort of, you know, there's this connection through the show of removal and fragmentation, and things are sort of separated into these lines. That's kind of how I look at places, that there's always sort of this potential for things to kind of just come apart. Doesn't mean that sounds worse than what I think, but so I wanted to print on the edges of things that are only, you know, they only exist as long as the tension is holding them together. I was actually working on sort of larger versions of these. Had some sort of structural and engineering things that I was coming into towards the end. And sort of decided to pull back on, you know, forcing them into the show, and instead just sort of showed these were kind of the studies that are leading into it. But this is kind of the, sort of a parallel idea that's kind of floating around right now of making these things that are printed on the edge and are loose, but they're just held together by tension. So you only get that image as long as you want to keep it together.
Kind of like in school when you draw on the spine of a book or the pages.
Yeah.
When the book is closed.
Right. Yeah, I totally forgot about doing that. Exactly like that. So this is sort of an idea that I kind of see coalescing in the future. But it kind of grew out of doing these woodcuts and the video piece that's in the show.
Excellent. And one more question. Somebody asked to go back to the first room and show the print with the yellow up close. They're curious about the color in that print because it's so different than the color utilized in your other prints.
Yeah, yellows, burgundy, and sort of a chocolatey black brown at the bottom there.
And you said this one was made before the CMYK prints, right?
Yes, yeah. I had sort of the idea of the CMYK prints already, but I just hadn't gotten to a place or time to try that out yet. So this is just a reductive print, so it's working with, it works light to dark and kind of big flats of color with lots of carving. This is probably closer to maybe how I'd maybe paint a study or something. I think it was coming out of this is based on Crowhassan Prairie, west of the cities, and it was like end of summer, beginning of fall, so things were pretty golden brown out there, and yeah, it was just really, there's these massive waves of grass out there that were just this gold color. Maybe not that gold, but it's how it feels anyways when you're there. I think prior to getting into the CMYK prints, I think the reductive prints, and there's even another reductive print in the show, a small one in the show. Those are more, I think, how it maybe just traditionally go at a print with color, or like a little gouache painting or something like that. There's a lot of color in it.
Yeah, these seem more like in no way belittling them, but more of a straightforward reduction print, whereas the later prints that was a pretty novel process that you were employing.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited to make more of those. That's the plan here.
Just let your neck recover.
Yeah. The wrists are good now. I really enjoyed making work like this. I'm really excited about making that work.
I would even say that it comes through.
Yeah.
In the work. Well,
is there anything else, or?
I think that about wraps it up. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with our audience here tonight, Mike.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you get a chance and you're in the area, the show is up through the 5th.
Yep, Saturday the 5th.
And please check it out if you can. Also, go to High Point's website. You can go to my website. I'm getting the last of the images. I've been updating my website, so I'm pretty much there right now. And again, just massive thanks for High Point and McKnight. It's been really cool to have this time to be with the work and then to keep it moving along into new places.
Yeah, it's great to see something truly good come out of 2020. You made absolutely made the most of what was in many ways not the best situation.
It was, there were lots of periods of serious doubts through 2020 with sticking to this stuff, but I guess I just gotta believe that you keep wanting to bring sort of beauty into the world. You're also sort of fostering it to keep being there tomorrow. So that's kind of how I was trying to look at things, because there was a lot of there were many reasons to get bogged down on the world.
That's well said.
But you got to keep it going.
Yes.
So thanks again. This has been awesome. Really,
yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I'll just reiterate, everyone, the exhibition is up through February 5th. Gallery hours here at High Point are 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then noon until 4 p.m. on Saturdays. And as Mike said, there will be lots of content on our website as well as Mike's website too, if you can't make it in person. But if you really want to experience these works, and I highly suggest that you do, come see them in person while you have the chance. So thank you for joining us and for your patience with that little hiccup at the beginning. And we will hopefully see you soon.